Valkyrie here with another Warframe video. This time I'm going to go over my actual Saryn build guide and just some advice on playing her, and we'll see how it goes. So this is the primary build that I've worked out for Elite Sanctuary Onslaught. I don't think I've actually changed anything from the previous video where I showed off this build, but if so, well, there you go. This has worked better for me so far. With the exception of the arcanes, I don't really have any arcanes at a significant enough rank to where they're useful. Right now there is some sort of weird interaction with arcanes and spores, so Arcane Fury and Arcane Strike will be constantly triggered by your spores. This I expect to be patched out any day now. However, for now it's kind of a nice perk. If you have access to them, I recommend using Arcane Guardian and Arcane Energize on Saryn pretty much at all times. Particularly in Elite Sanctuary Onslaught. When you hit around wave 8 with this build, you're going to start getting just blown up randomly. But if you have Arcane Guardian, that's probably not going to happen, and you'll be able to push up several waves higher. Arcane Energize, similar purpose. This build is very energy greedy, and even with high-level Xeneric Focus School, you're going to have trouble keeping your energy up without intentionally tanking damage using melee blocks so that you don't die to charge up your energy reserves. I've gotten to wave 8 and 9 fairly consistently, although it struggles on those waves without the better arcanes. Now, the other build I'm going to suggest is this build, which is my general Starchart build. With 207% duration, you do have enough duration that you can actually make it between defense waves with a little bit of damage built up each time. However, once you hit like every 5 wave interval, you're pretty much going to lose all your damage while people are choosing whether or not to stay or extract. This will be less bad in Void Fissure missions, of course, because of the pausing that happens when people are deciding what to do. But yeah, you're going to lose a ton of your stacks during that. However, the rest of the time you'll be able to actually do the kind of slow build up Saryn is intended for with this much power strength and with this much duration. Do keep in mind you need to be constantly fighting enemies to keep your growing power buff up. It is actually pretty significant to your effectiveness, as you need it to stack spore damage more quickly, reduce the amount of stacks you lose when you recast spore, and increase the status chance of spore. So this is very important for both builds, and I think it's kind of necessary unless you're going to use like a much higher level, like a maxed out blind rage, and maybe augur secrets instead of augur message or something, in order to get 200% power strength without using growing power at all. Otherwise, you kind of need growing power. And this, of course, does not quite get 200% power strength, but it gets closer to it, and that's kind of the goal. After 200%, the value of additional power strength goes down a lot because you no longer gain more status chance, and of course, the stack loss per cast will be at 10%, and I mean, it's still better to get it down farther, but that's like, once you've halved it, it's a pretty significant boost to you, and you don't really need to drive it down too much lower, not when you're not also getting some other side benefits from it anyway. Yeah, similar thing for duration. Duration gets your stack loss per second down to 5% from 10%, which is a little bit more manageable. It's still so high that certain situations will screw you over. If you need to move rooms, you're kind of boned. If you have to wait for people to choose to extract or stay in the mission, you're kind of boned. But otherwise, you will be able to kind of continuously build stacks over time, even when you get unlucky with spawns and stuff. Although, missions with excessively low enemy density are just going to suck, and you're going to have to just cast your ultimate. Now, I do assume for this Starchart build that you're going to make up for the lack of energy efficiency with Xeneric Energy School and Energy Pizzas and weapons that can boost your energy gain, like Cephalon Suda faction procs, right? So if you don't have access to those, I recommend instead that you remove Blind Rage and put in, Transient Fortitude like this, right? And it reduces your duration and it reduces your power strength, so it's bad and bad, really. But it gets you back to a more reliable amount of efficiency. If you actually need high efficiency to manage playing the frame, I'm not sure Saryn's a great choice for you. Like, if you don't have access to any way to get more energy, and you're not going to be partying with someone who's going to give you more energy, well, you can instead do like this ESO build on Starchart. Actually, sorry, that's a better alternative. You're just going to have to get hundreds of adrenaline or rage and take damage to get energy. She is very energy greedy, and you just need some method to deal with it. And you'd rather not deal with it by sucking up a mod slot on hundreds of adrenaline when you need range, strength, and duration to be very high for Saryn to be effective. Okay, so yeah, this is the loadout I've got. It's not too important. Oh, there's this one other build. This isn't actually good, but it's funny, and I'm going to show this off at the end. And yeah, we'll see what that's about later. So I don't particularly recommend any of these weapons. I'm kind of a fan of them, except the Amprex. I'm using the Amprex as a primary because it hits multiple targets. There isn't too much need for a AoE weapon anymore with Saryn. However, when you're casting spores into a group of enemies and you need to spread it quickly, right, to start dealing damage and stripping armor, if the group of enemies is jostling about, it can sometimes be hard to hit the enemy you're aiming at. So I prefer spray and pray or AoE weapons to ensure you can just blast through a group of enemies and get some spore spreads. The Amprex is a really effective way to do that while also being a very, very good weapon in general. There are a lot of other good options for Saryn. Machine guns, AoE weapons, very good. Or you can just use melee as well. Melee is still very solid on her, and Toxic Lash is incredibly powerful, not just because of the damage boost. The actual damage boost is crazy good because it's doubled on melee, but also because it status procs enemies with Toxin. She can viral and corrosive proc enemies as well, so now she has 3 reliable status types she can apply to enemies, and then your melee weapon, whatever melee weapon you choose, will be able to apply IPS, and that means that if you also like mod it correctly, so you get like some radiation damage on there, you'll be able to do huge amounts of damage utilizing condition overload, right? Let's take a look at what she can do. So I think I've got, let me reset these just to make sure, but I think I've got level 130 enemies on here. Yep. And we've got our, did I select the ESO build? No, it's on the dirt build. Good thing I checked. Okay, so let's take a look at the ESO build right here and see how it does versus these guys. Spores on an initial enemy. The initial tick rate up, of course, if you only have one guy infected, is pretty low, but I also didn't use growing power. But yeah, let's shoot him. We've got spores spread to most enemies. Shoot the guys in the corner. Oh, all right, spread it out to the other groups. And we're gonna have to go shoot out here some more. Now see, this you wouldn't have to do if you had 280% power or rate power range. And of course, that's the really nice thing about the Starchart build. However, I found that to get that extra range, you kind of have to sacrifice other things that you now really need for Saryn and you would like to have. So I don't think it's worth it anymore to do that high range build. Instead, you just need to run around the map a little bit more and actively spread your spores a little bit more, and that will make up for it. So it takes a little while to kill these guys, but should get them down pretty fast. Still very high damage, and of course, you know, versus even higher level enemies, you'd still be able to ramp up. And you can see the decay rate is pretty fast, but if you were running to another group of enemies over here, we'd be able to spawn them, and then, oh god. You know, we started at 300 damage. That's still a decent head start. It's not fantastic, it's not what I really like to see, but hey, you know what? You're not losing all your damage. It's certainly not as good as she was with Saryn 3.0, because of course you would have gotten up to 1500 damage by that point, and the damage ramp up is just so high that you can you know, reliably get your way back. Oh, I don't have Toxic Lash on. Whoops. The damage ramp up is so high with the old version of her that you didn't have to worry about keeping your stacks, right? Well, you lost them all, right? But you didn't have to worry about losing all your stacks because you'd be able to get back to a huge amount of damage in about 10 seconds. Now, I'd say that now keeping your stacks is actually pretty important now that the decay mechanic has been added, right? You know, they added this nice decay mechanic so you can save some stacks, but at the same time, it's very important that you actually do utilize this mechanic if you want to be effective. So, you know, that's kind of expected, but in case it wasn't obvious, you do need to pay attention to that and make sure that you, you know, continuously look for new enemies to spread spores to, and you don't wait too long before spreading your spores to enemies. Now, of course, the Starchart build has a much more leeway in this longer spread range, and of course, the higher duration actually is very nice. But even the Sanctuary Onslaught build isn't too good. Or too bad in that regard. The really big deal you're going to have is that with this build, you're going to need to, or you're going to lose all of your stacks when you go through Sanctuary Onslaught portals. Pretty much, you lose about 90% because it's 30% decay per second while you're going through the portal, which is pretty nasty, and it's on top of your regular decay. So the best thing you can do to mitigate that is to try and spread your spores to a bunch of enemies before you jump through the Sanctuary Onslaught portal. I'll probably include some Sanctuary Onslaught footage, and maybe I'll show myself doing that, because then as you're going through the portal, it's going to be ticking up, right, in damage. And then when you load in on the other side, once the nullification effect is worn off, but you can't really act yet, you're going to get a couple extra little stacks of damage, and then you can start spreading your spores on that side of the portal. And the other area isn't loaded out immediately, so you're going to have that like constant spread rate immediately, even while you're casting your one ability and then you're spreading spores out again. You're still getting those stacks. So that takes you 1 or 2 seconds. You're still getting 1 or 2 seconds of max stack gain. So it's not a huge difference, but it does help you get ahead as you go forward. Now, the one thing you really have to avoid is dying, and that's why it's kind of unfortunate that you kind of explode around wave 8 of Sanctuary Onslaught, because if you die, you'll lose all of your stacks. And losing your stacks hurts a lot more now than it used to. So I'm going to do this again. I've done it in some other videos, and hopefully I'm not going to die just going up against some really tough enemies. Even though I'm going to turn enemy AI on and self-invulnerability off. Whoops, how do I keep doing that? Okay, so hopefully this won't embarrass myself too much, but really the point I'm just trying to get across here is Saryn is actually pretty effective against these enemies, even if you aren't protected, right? It's tough to survive versus them, but she can be still fairly effective after the rework, even though it was a nerf overall. It was a very significant nerf. However, despite that, she's not bad, just maybe annoying to play. No, I didn't actually do anything different with these guys. All right, so let's, oh, I did do it. Never mind, my bad. So let's whip out our melee weapon, you know, start blocking. Oh, shit. Okay. You do need to remember that you gotta actively spread spores, which means you gotta risk it for the biscuit a little bit. I mean, if I would probably in Sanctuary Onslaught or something try and poke out with a gun. The reason I'm actually doing this is, of course, because melee block is very good, and Toxic Lash buffs your melee block. I think it caps out at like 95% damage reduction, but 95% damage reduction when Saryn also has pretty good damage reduction herself is not so bad. Let's see if I can get an ultimate on these guys. There we go, that should help finish them off. And the bombard just hanging on. All right, there we go. Yeah, level 130 enemies, no big deal. I didn't even actually get wrecked too hard. There wasn't any moments of near death. It's really like when there's a large swarm of enemies. Like, how many did I spawn? 14 enemies. And when you've got like 30 enemies at that level after your ass, it's a little bit more of a problem. But still, it's not too bad. She's quite effective. And if you have arcanes, it's even better for you. Now, the melee block, like I said, very, very, very crucial. Let's, why don't I just do this again only with my primary? I might be able to still do it, but it's going to be kind of rough. Okay. The key is to not get shot at all, right? I think I'll maybe let myself get shot in a sec. Like if I just stand out here kind of tanking the damage, like I did that before and I didn't die with the melee weapon out, because 95% damage reduction, just to hammer that home. It's super, super good. And yeah, you're going to want to do that versus real enemies because you can utilize Hunter Adrenaline that way, right? You go out and you block with your melee weapon, and with Toxic Lash on, you're getting like 95% damage reduction probably, or something close to it. And you're going to be able to gain energy by taking damage that way. Without dying, so it's fairly safe, right? And then you hide back into cover, swap on to like the Amprex or some other weapon, and you can fire around a corner, you know, because in Warframe, well, this isn't a really good weapon to, you know what, maybe I can do it without killing myself with the Hiku Prime, right? So in Warframe, you can kind of like, yeah, no, I can't do it with this one. You can just kind of poke out and like shoot a little bit out there, and hopefully not hit yourself, you know, or what I like to do is like drop you drop your little molt over there, enemies are shooting at it, you pop out, you shoot them a bit, you spread spores, right? And that way you can keep the spore cloud going, and you heal yourself. And then you poke out with a melee weapon in order to generate more energy. That's when you're fighting like really high level enemies where like actually going out and just running around in them is like certain death. Okay, so let's clear this out. I'll show off this Starchart build just to kind of like show you the difference in how spores spread and how your decay stacks go down. And then I'm going to show you the dirt build, and then we're going to cut to some other footage. Okay, so let's turn off enemy AI and give this a go. Okie dokie. Let's also, yeah, we're going to change to the Starchart build. Let's give this sucker a shot. So do remember you want to have Toxic Lash on. There's a few weird things that used to spread spores before that don't really work correctly now without Toxic Lash. Like the clouds left by the Torrid will still spread spores, but only if you have Toxic Lash on. And I feel like it can be a little buggy, but I'm not 100% sure that it's actually just, it's not just visual issues, right, with the range of the weapon. Okay, so you just shoot ones. All right, all 20 guys infected instantly. That 280% range can just be crucial at times. I know in the Simulacrum, it's kind of, it's kind of like, oh, well, it hits the sweet spot in the Simulacrum, but does it in actual missions? And the answer to that is, well, it does it in some actual missions. It hits the sweet spot in a few actual missions, and it makes like an actual significant difference. So with this build, I've got a little bit more power strength, so enemies are getting their armor stripped off sooner, and my stacks are going to ramp up a little bit faster. Probably if you went and looked at the time, also not to mention the fact that I spread out to enemies instantly, so if you look at the time it takes me to kill these guys earlier in the video and the time here, and actually compared it should be less. I have a Saryn time to kill comparison. Oh no, that's not really relevant now, is it? Even just the increased status chance will actually improve your time to kill a good bit, even without the fact that we're increasing our stack rate by a bit. Now, it's not too obvious how much the decay rate has gone down, but it is by like 2.5% per second less, and it makes a noticeable difference. It's kind of like the difference between kind of hitting equilibrium on defense missions and actually gaining damage over time on defense missions when you go from that like 150% duration to 200% plus duration. And of course, if you can get more into your build somehow, more is better. Possibly it might even be worth it to, well, I don't know if narrow-minded is really worth it, unfortunately. And I've already got Constitution, Augur Message, and Prime Continuity on here. So there's not really too much more you can do to improve your duration, unfortunately. This is kind of the upper limit. But if you could do even more without actually reducing range significantly like this does, it might be fairly worth it. That's also why I would say Fleeting Expertise. I've seen some people do that even on this version of Saryn, and I don't think it's very good on her at all. Like the stat, it means that you like if you're running Fleeting Expertise, like your stack decay is going to be horrible, and you're basically going to never continue to build up damage between groups of enemies and stuff. So I don't really like it. I don't think it's very good. Let's look at the dirt build. So the dirt build goes off of something pretty funny, which is that so Toxic Lash will work with pretty much any source of damage from a weapon, right? And it will add a lot of extra damage. It works like Rhino's Roar, so it's total damage, right? So if I got Toxic Lash at 75%, it's 75% more total damage. And so the thing is, the Hiku Prime, I've got concealed explosives on this weapon. And so with concealed explosives, that's going to create this huge blast next to the enemies, like, and you get guaranteed toxic procs off of each blast. And so with the crazy fire rate, you can actually do kind of okay here. Now let's activate our ultimate on these guys, jump back a little bit, and continue. Oh shit! Toxic proc to myself guaranteed. Am I going to die from this? Yeah. Whoops. Okay, well, maybe I should have put invulnerability on. Let's give this another shot over at the other group of enemies. As you can see, it was doing okay damage, but not like super crazy amounts of damage. Let's refresh this. But there is something you can do here to make this a little bit more effective. So if you spread your spores across these guys, and in this build, spore spread is very poor because the range is so poor. But so we spread the spores across all the enemies, and then we ultimate, right? Now, the amount of armor that they've lost at this point is actually going to be really significant. So there we go. They just die like almost instantly. And you saw my spore spread got up to a decent amount of damage, but not nearly as high as it needed to get before. And that's because I've got 100%. I should have 100%. Yeah, I've got 100% status chance, right? So let's look at this with mods. This build, I don't think this build is actually like a good build, but I think it's a pretty funny build. So status chance over 100%. So 3 corrosive procs per second, and high damage growth per enemy. So you can see even though my damage growth is way higher, they died at a much lower amount of damage. That's showing you how effective the Toxic Lash bonus with the Hiku Prime actually is. It's more than you would think. It's not like great. This is called a dirt build for a reason. It's kind of more silly than effective. However, nonetheless, you do get some decent effectiveness out of Toxic Lash here, and you can kill groups of enemies that are tightly packed even at an incredibly high level really quickly because of how this works. So I'm not necessarily advocating this, but it's hilarious, and you do an incredible amount of damage very quickly. Okay, so let's actually do the summary now. So ESO build, you want Steel, Fiber, and Vitality for that tank. It's really ADD build because you need strength, you need duration, you need range, and you kind of wish you had efficiency, but there's just no room left for it. And yeah, this will do very effective in the single player ESO. You probably still have to use this for multiplayer Elite Sanctuary Onslaught as well, unless you have a Blessing Trinity with you. With Blessing Trinity, then you can go with a Starchart build, and maybe you can hide in a corner, and your allies will distract enemies and spread your spores for you, and this build will be more effective. A little side note to that is that hiding in a corner build is still very effective with Saryn, maybe even more effective than before, since you can, have those spore damage build over time, and now allies can spread your spores at max range. So you have like a self-damage Trinity or a Equinox with you, and you have some sort of defense frame that'll protect you in a corner, and you hide in that corner and just like recast spores come out and recast spores once in a while, and let your allies spread them around. And I think you can do that sort of just like passive play style a little bit better now, actually. It maybe doesn't kill all the enemies on the map as effectively, but you can certainly like reach higher tiers of damage doing it, and it's safer. You can do it more safely, right, by just hiding around. And if you do actively have an ally helping you with it, like a self-damage Trinity build, you will actually get better map, or you should get better map coverage at least. I don't know if it's guaranteed, but theoretically, because your spores will be spreading from Trinity, killing things at maximum range instead of at half range when things die, and because you won't have the situation where maybe your allies actually clear out the map and you lose all your damage, it should be better than before to just do that kind of like super turtle comp for Elite Sanctuary Onslaught, I think. And yeah, and if you otherwise though, if you don't have a pre-made group like that, I recommend this build. And then this build, it's not actually good, but it's funny, and I'll probably end up using it once in a while for speedrunning missions. And that's it. Now I'm gonna switch to another video, and we'll show off her effectiveness, maybe in like one regular mission, like Hydron or something, and in Elite Sanctuary Onslaught. Quick note before I do that though, which is that I'm not going to show her off in any low enemy density missions. That's because she's just not very good in those missions, and I think you should just not bring her along to those missions, or not expect to have her abilities be particularly useful besides your ultimate, right? So Miasma is pretty good. It's got 20 base range, which means that if you use the maximum range build, you can clear rooms with it. Its damage is better than it looks, since it doubles its own damage. If you use the Starchart build, you can basically just maybe tweak it, maybe do some alternative version of that build where you do add in, you drop Blind Rage, you add Transient Fortitude, you add in Prime Continuity, and you add in, you add in, what's the thing I'm thinking of? You add in some power efficiency, like Streamlined, but probably not Fleeting Expertise. And then you've got the situation where your ultimate still does solid damage, and it's also going to be more efficient to cast, so you can spam it a bit. And you just run through lower level, like low enemy density missions, you cast it, you kill everything within 50 meters, that's pretty much a whole room, and you move on. And that's pretty much it. Maybe you use Molt as well for the speed boost. Shrug. Yeah, that's kind of whatever. Hello, Future Yakri here with a little bit of a forward for my Saryn guide. So I didn't notice, because I kind of slept through the middle of the day and didn't check Reddit for a while, that another Warframe update had come out and Saryn had been changed once again. So I want to just go over this really quick. I don't think any of these changes are significant enough to warrant mention in the guide or like a rework of it. I just want to do a quick note of each of them that is worth, actually noting. So, drain occurs once per half second instead of continuous on spores. It shouldn't make a huge difference for any of us, really. Targets affected by miasma always spread on death. This is the big thing. This is the big thing for this update, in my opinion. I don't know, I've been saying that should be a thing in a few different videos. I probably say it somewhere during my guide, although I can't quite recall if I have. But yeah, no, I think it's a big quality of life buff, and it kind of like, I think it's the best compromise we could realistically expect for spore spreading on death, because of the reason that they removed that. I just don't think there's any chance of it being brought back. However, this gives us back some of the convenience that we had with that, and pushes Saryn a little bit back towards like a caster type frame. And I think that kind of moves her a little bit more in the kind of towards the style of play that I enjoyed with her previously. So personally, I'm pretty happy with it. Now let's see, just some kind of minor fixes and quality of life changes, like the quality of life change / fixes, I suppose. Like targets you cast Spore on directly now spread on death. Okay, great. That means that the big thing that solves is that it solves the issue of casting spore on an enemy and they die to the first tick of spore. Not necessarily because you've gotten your spore stack so amazing, but because perhaps they were already at low health and there weren't any other enemies nearby to cast on. Now, note, they say fix Saryn's spore damage decay drain discrepancies when entering a nullifier bubble for the second time. Now, I'm going to mention at one point in the guide that I think my damage didn't decay as much as I expected it to. I bet that was affecting Sanctuary Onslaught as well, because those gates act as a nullification field as per a nullifier bubble, so probably was affecting that as well. So miasma was also changed, increased sickness duration by 1 second, lowered energy cost to 75, and decreased damage tick to 300. Now this kind of whatever changes, it makes it a little bit better utility so that you can utilize the new quality of life change that they added with miasma guaranteeing that spores will spread on death. For the enemies being affected by it, by making it scale better with duration, and or if you want to tank duration for some ungodly reason, you'll still get a little bit of miasma time in there. The energy cost is lower, so in more situations you will have that energy available to cast it, even if you have to take negative efficiency. And damage tick decreased. All right, whatever. They wanted to compensate for that. Yeah, that covers it. Saryn's been changed a little bit more. These are all changes for the better, I believe. And now on to the guide. Alright, here we are in Hydron, and I'm doing okay on stacking. Of course, there's some awkward moments since my allies are actually pretty active, so sometimes finding a new enemy to actually cast my stacking ability on is a little bit challenging. I'm using the Starchart build that I had earlier, and I'm just going to show you how it's played once I get to a new wave of enemies. It's not super challenging, except that you have to be active about spreading your spores and actually finding enemies and casting your spores on them, and just more spore spreading. Pretty much just only spore spreading is what matters. You actually go around, actually kill things. It can help if your allies do kill things, or at least I don't know if I would say it helps necessarily on missions like this. Enemy density is pretty good. I've gotten around 20 dudes infected at a time. But even so, allies like Octavia and Equinox can clear the map. And if they do, there's nothing for your spores to spread to, and you start getting decaying. And as you can see, normal missions like this, not nearly, or at least I'm gonna put this before the Sanctuary Onslaught footage, and it's not nearly as effective as Sanctuary Onslaught, is it? In Sanctuary Onslaught, you can pretty reliably get a ton of targets infected. Now, the nice thing about this is going to be if you don't have allies that are helping very much, you are going to have a much easier time getting 20 enemies infected and keeping a lot of enemies infected for a lot longer, right? Here we've got Equinox, much better. I think that is our Equinox, right? Yep, it is our Equinox. Equinox is a much better map clear frame than Saryn is now, just in general. And so it can be kind of hard to keep up with them, even though Equinox killing things does spread spores at a larger range. Oh, there we go. I had 19 infected for a second. And as you can see, though, it doesn't matter that much if there's no one to spread spores to. Is when Equinox clears the entire map out, right? Okay, so that can be somewhat of a problem. Nonetheless, you do have some other options if you want to try and be fairly effective. You can drop your ultimate. It's got a 56 meter range. Yeah, 56 meter range. And on this map, that's going to hit pretty much every room if you cast it in the center of the map. And so if you're doing that, it's still a little bit better synergy with other people on your team, like Equinox, because then Equinox can pop their ult earlier, or enemies may even die to the combined /proc ticks plus the viral ticks from your ultimate, and the /proc ticks will be doing double damage now. So that can be kind of nice. It's pretty hard to maintain stacks between or over the extraction screen like that, even when everyone extracts pretty quickly. If you have about 500 damage stacks, which can be challenging to build up, but if you do have 500 or so built up, you'll end up getting like 200 maybe remaining with this build after switching over like that. Which is, it's not great, but it's something, and it's kind of nice. It's kind of nice. I would say that it's not really better than she was before, because you would build up stacks so much more quickly. At least when you're the one person carrying the team. I think she was better in 3.0. In 3.5, I think she is actually better if you're in a situation like this where your teammates are doing a lot of the work. Damn, how did that not? Oh, that guy. Okay, where your teammates are doing a lot of the work, and Basically, because in 3.0, then you wouldn't be able to infect enough enemies, like 20 enemies, to build up damage stacks very quickly. Now, damage stack buildup is capped at 10 enemies. Any more than 10 enemies affected does not increase your damage buildup speed. As a result of that, it doesn't really matter if you only have 7 or 10 or 12 enemies infected. You're still going to have relatively fast damage ramp up. Of course, in this build, if you have growing power triggered, you should actually have better damage ramp up than before the update. And if you had an even higher damage build, like with no overextended, for example, you would definitely build up damage stacks faster than before. Of course, I don't really favor that build because you can't actually like spread spores across the whole map, and you would have even more trouble keeping enemies infected than I'm having right now with these active players on my team. So I think that covers it for this build. It's actually pretty simple to play. If you were on the star map, you're just not going to have hard enough enemies for many of your other abilities to matter, besides your ultimate and your spores, right? So I trigger my ultimate. As you can see, those guys are dying really quickly. They started taking just some slash proc ticks from Equinox, didn't even have to trigger his ultimate, and that's like a pretty nice synergy there, right? If you're playing with an Equinox, especially if you're playing with someone you know, you can activate your ultimate after Equinox activates their ultimate. And these enemies dying inside are going to give Equinox a bunch of damage stacks. Since then, next wave of enemies spawn, Equinox triggers their ultimate, killing everything. So it's a fairly okay synergy there. Although, you know, Equinox is still doing most of the killing and damage because MAME is very, very good. But it's the best way to play with someone like that on your team. Toxic Lash does a pretty solid damage boost even at low power strength. Like 44% is 44% of total damage. It's equivalent to a Rhino Roar of similar power that also guarantees a Toxic proc for the total amount of that damage. So Toxic proc at 44% of your total damage, including I believe including criticals and stuff, is pretty good. It's actually a lot better than you'll normally get from Toxic procs with a lot of weapons. So it doesn't matter versus this level of enemies, but if you were doing this build perhaps on a sortie because you, say, expect to get healed by Trinity or something, so you think you can actually get away with such low HP, you are going to get some decent amount of extra effectiveness from Toxic Lash and that sort of thing. But yeah, like I said, it's primarily all about your ult. Drop that. Oh look, there's enemies all over the place. I couldn't see that I managed to hit there. I don't have to run around looking for one to infect with spores. And if there weren't as many active people on my team, I could use Spore a little bit more effectively. But a lot of the time, especially even, I'm on wave 9 now, if I was still on wave 4, your ultimate would definitely be more effective because it will immediately kill enemies in maybe 2 ticks. You don't have to build up any damage. Okay, so that's all for Saryn on regular missions. She's going to struggle, like I've mentioned before, she's going to struggle more on missions with lower enemy density. Hydron is pretty good with like 20 enemies out at a time often. But other missions, it's going to be like 10 enemies around, and you know, she's not going to be very effective with her abilities on those missions. But those missions also aren't really very relevant to gameplay. You can just, you know, go through, spin attack through those enemies, or ignore them in most of those missions. It's not really a big deal. You don't really need any particular frame to deal with those missions. So, shrug. Who's to say? Who's to say? I will see you in the next clip. Alrighty, now I'm over in Sanctuary Onslaught, and I got a little bit into it so I can show you one of the harder areas, you know, wave 6, 7. And yeah, I think I'll just jump into this and you'll get a good idea of how effective she is in Sanctuary Onslaught, which is still pretty effective. If anything, I think it's more like she's been more pigeonholed into ESO now, because her overall power level isn't quite so ridiculous, which doesn't let her, I don't know, just kind of like cheese through lower level missions by spreading out, getting a ton of damage, everything dies really easily. Before, okay, hopefully I won't just immediately die now that I've started the video, but it is always a lot harder to talk and play like this, especially now that Saryn is a lot more, let's say action, oh fucking god dang it, action intensive, let's put it that way. There's the guy I needed to shoot, where you've got to just kind of make sure you don't lose spore count, because you're not going to be able to get it back up very easily if you do. I know a lot of people seem to have the opposite opinion, but I think that it's much more important now. Yes, this zone is shit. It's a lot more important now that you don't, you don't die, you don't do anything wrong as Saryn when you're playing ESO, which isn't 100% a bad thing, I guess. Like, it probably appeals to certain types of people, and I don't know if I all 100% hate it, but a lot of people dislike it for an understandable reason, which is that Warframe is a very casual-oriented game, and Saryn, who is kind of hard to play in these sort of missions anyway, because she's actually pretty squishy, somewhat deceptively squishy, but has really, really high damage. She's become even harder to play because you have to just be like running around like a fucking chipmunk on cocaine, trying to avoid damage and make sure you don't lose these damage stacks, because before you would inevitably lose damage stacks. It was just kind of a fact of life, but when you have this high enemy density, you'd be able to, increase your damage stacks maybe 50% faster. So on a lot of these levels, I'd be getting maybe like 5k damage instead of, I'm probably gonna get a little bit over 2k. We might get close to 3k, but I'd probably be close to 5k already. Yeah, I would be a little over 3k approximately at this point. Especially with that section when I had 40 enemies infected, that would have been really incredible for me in the past. And so now, like, basically the point is that if I die, I lose 100% of my stacks, and it's very, very easy to die here. Especially I don't have Arcane Guardian. I'm just running around with Saryn's base tankiness plus mods. Oh shit! Yeah. And you have to also pay a lot more attention to keeping your spores going, because if you don't tag enemies constantly, you'll lose the spores, and like I said, they're harder to get back, so you can't die. It's more important that you don't die. It's more important that you keep tagging enemies and respreading spores and constantly fighting. And so, yeah, she's definitely, I'd say, more active. She kind of needed to be active before anyway. But at the same time, you also still have to do shit like this. You just like kind of run around back here, tag this guy with spores, shoot him, stand back here, because if I actually go out too much, I'm gonna die. And it gets to be more true on later, oh shit, levels where even like doing that and actually going into a melee animation was pretty risky. I think, at least if nothing else, if DE doesn't change her, she's going to become, I think, a little more playable, because melee is really nice to use with Toxic Lash. When you can dodge cancel out of melee animations, because then you can like swing in and dodge roll after maybe hitting one enemy and popping some spores. That'll be kind of nice. And then you can have your melee weapon out to block attacks, and I really like that as a method of tank, but it can also be pretty hard because you need to swap back to your gun. It might be my imagination, but I'm pretty sure I decayed my damage much more slowly than usual on that portal. That was interesting. Yeah, so you need to, oh Jesus. Yeah, it'll be easier or more viable to have your melee weapon out for this kind of playstyle. And that means that you can use it to block, because, like, let's see, drag this out. I got Toxic Lash on, right? So, like, all right, I can actually, like, just kind of take hits. Come on, shoot me. Anyone? Nobody? Oh, there we go. Ah, look at that. Ah, it's not even that effective. My shields are actually doing great right now. However, I now need to spread some damage, right? And that means I gotta risk it and swing out. I took a bunch more damage there than I was taking before. And potentially if some shotgun guy shoots you while you're in the animation or something, you'll just die instantly, which is not super cool. And if you could dodge roll out of those animations more reliably, it would be a bit safer to do, is the point I'm making. Anyway, so as you can see, despite some of my complaints about the new rework and how I think it could still use a couple more tweaks to actually be good, she's very effective in this game mode, if not in general in the game. I mean, she's still effective in general in the game. I think it's just my point before stands. The type of mission where very few frames are effective on those missions anyway, right? Like low enemy density missions where, like exterminates and stuff, where mission's super easy. A frame like Ember is actually good on those missions, but there aren't very many frames that are really suited to that sort of play style, and the sort of play style isn't really challenging anyway. It's more of a matter of some frames allowing you to complete those missions with less pain in the ass, more efficiency, a little bit more speed, that kind of thing. Like Volt is a very good exterminate frame because of his speed boost, right? Okay. So is Nova, actually, because of her little fucking portals, which are really nice. This map is actually a lot better than the previous one for staying alive. A bit easier to just, a couple guys spawn up here. Oh, fuck. Spread some spores using them through the ground. And, oh, that's a lot of guys. That's a little bit different. Yeah, works out pretty okay most of the time. I don't think I have anything else really to say. I think I want to run through to the next zone, perhaps? Oh, fuck me. Well, here we go. And so now I've died, and my spores are really going to fall off. I wish I had more time in this zone to really demonstrate why this is an annoying problem. But I think you can kind of get the idea right now. I'm doing 125 damage a tick on my spores, and it's going to take them a while to run back up to like 1,000 damage or more, even with, you know, 32 enemies being infected or more. And that wasn't really a problem in the past. And, you know, like I said, in other places, I think that's maybe perhaps a necessary change from a design perspective, but it does mean that Saryn is weaker. She's got somewhat less of a sort of DPS tank that she can do, where she's like defended by enemies dying really quickly. And so you've got to be more on the ball now, not just in spreading your spores, but in staying alive. And if you do fuck up in that regard, it's going to be punished more harshly now than it was in the past. So keep that in mind when playing Saryn, but she's still a lot of fun on these kind of missions, at least if you like something that's really going to keep your actions per minute high, right? Because she will do that. Keep in mind, of course, that once you get to, like, I'm on zone 9 now, so this is pretty tough. I'm actually having an easier time than I usually do here, for whatever reason. Maybe just a little bit of luck, or whatnot. Reverse video curse. But, you know, actually doing tactics where you, like, hide in a little room on the side is actually pretty good, despite DE's efforts to nerf passive play, because unfortunately, passive play is the counter to your real weakness, which is not doing enough damage, but dying instantly. If no one shoots you, you can't die, so remember that. But you do need to poke out to spread spores. Probably I'd be better off doing it with an actual gun. Yeah, all right. Oh, I'm going to lose efficiency, though. Rip! I wasn't paying attention there. I could have done something about that, but I wasn't looking.